Thank you, praise band and choir. You made it a delightful morning so far. I want to thank you for being here to celebrate our nation's freedom. And it's not the 4th of July, but a church ought to be a place where we celebrate these kinds of things. If you have your Bible, turn it to me to the book of Joshua, chapter 14. We've been on a series of messages and telling the exciting stories of the Bible, which implant faith deep in our hearts. And coming up this summer, they're going to be the STEM camp: science, technology, energy, and engineering. We should have energy too, and math. And Becca asked me to tell a Bible story at every one of the STEM camps, and I said I would love to do that. Now, this is age 1 to older. It has to be a good Bible story to hold a 1-year-old's attention. But I love to do that, and I remember when I first started in the ministry and telling Bible stories at Vacation Bible School, telling of Noah's and the Ark to little kids, 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds. And so I told Becca when she started teaching Sunday school, I said, the secret is to play the story. Don't just tell the story or lecture about the story, but play the story. So I got on my hands and knees and I was showing all the animals. I was an elephant for a little while. I was a rhinoceros. I was a monkey, and all the kids' eyes were really big. And then I was a horse, and I made the sound of the horse. And I was kind of butting the kids with my head. And one little girl, she was about 2 years old. Her eyes got so big, and she said, "My daddy is a horse." The kids have the capacity for imagination. And those stories of faith, those legendary stories of faith, lots of questions about them. I'd love to just lecture on the historicity and all the different viewpoints that we have. But they plant a seed deep in our hearts. It's where the United States of America came from. If you know something about our founding of our country and read into history, it wasn't just about a tea tax. No, there was the Renaissance that took place, the Enlightenment. There was Rousseau, clear back to Solon of Athens, who started the democracy in Athens. And he had in his rule of government that if you lost the election, you had to leave for 10 years. That might be a good idea to start in the United States. I don't know. But then even higher than that, they quoted Moses, because the whole idea was not a king, it was not a dictator, it was the law held over men. And so these bright people and courageous people, and it wasn't a majority in the United States, 1/3 were for the revolution, 1/3 were against the revolution, and 1/3 really didn't care. These bright people like Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams, and Sam Adams, and all had a very different viewpoints. Thomas Paine was a famous revolutionary that was an atheist until his deathbed. Deathbeds tend to help people gain more faith. But this variety of people got together, and they saw this idea that this country could be a light on the hill, this utopian idea that we could make a difference. Now, we've struggled with that. I can't tell you that, and no one would tell you that we're a perfect nation. We had the idea that all men were created equal in the Declaration of Independence, but we struggled with that, didn't we? Until the Civil War, and even through the Civil War. And Andrew Jackson, who was raised with the Cherokee Indians, has such favorable attitudes and laws for the Native Americans, changed later on in his life when he was easily influenced, and it led to actually the change in our economy. From a farm economy to a market-driven economy, because they took all the native lands on the east, sent them out to the west, and they began to raise things like cotton on the land that was there. So we had this idea, we had this ideal that was somewhere placed in the heart. And that part of that, those people, those various backgrounds, believed it came from these stories they had been raised in the story. And even though Brown University started, there were other universities that started earlier, George Whitefield, or my mind's not remembering names as well, but each one of the Ivy League schools were started out of a religious revival. And in the churches is where the revolution started to take place, and it was out of these stories these stories of faith. One time, when I had to announce to the church that my daughter Elise and my son-in-law Ray were taking our grandson Elijah to Honduras, where the Gibsons followed them later, and others, one couple came up to me and they said, if we keep going to this church, can you tell us that our kids won't become missionaries or serve in the military like so many kids have, or launch off on some great dream? We're afraid of that. And that was a really hard question to answer, because even though I taught Elise when she was a little girl about David and Goliath and all these stories, I wasn't so happy to hear that they're moving to Honduras. That was a challenging idea. And I told this couple standing right out on the side there, I said, no, I can't guarantee you that your kids won't grow up and want to take down the giants and the challenges in this world. In fact, there's the high likelihood that they will if we keep telling the powerful Word of God. So this is one of those stories, perfect story to celebrate our country and what we could be, is a story of Caleb. At 40 years of age, he was picked for the special forces to go investigate the promised land that their forefathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, had been. And then they'd been in slavery to Israel, and they had no place else to go for their people to survive, but to go in and to take the promised land. They formed a committee to go in and decide whether they thought they could take it. They thought, well, this is the land flowing with milk and honey. Look at the grapes that they've got here. Look at the vineyards. Look at all the benefits in this area. And you might go there, have gone there a few years ago and not seen much. But if you go there today, you'll see orange vineyards. And it really has been a prosperous land. And they came back, and only 2 people from the committee voted, let's take it. Joshua and Caleb. All of the 10 said, yeah, it's great, but there's no way we can take it. We saw these big guys that should be playing for the Los Angeles Lakers. No, they didn't say that. That were the grandfathers of Goliath, and we cannot take it. We're just a group of families. We're not even an army. And Joshua and Caleb, their same age, different mindset, said we could do it. God's great. And so Moses prophesied into their life, just like someone around you might prophesy into your life. He had a moment of vision for them. He said, you two will get to live to see your dreams come true. And they wandered around the desert being ambushed by different hostiles and all kinds of difficulties until a whole generation died. And they came around to the same place. And guess who is still alive? Joshua and Caleb. And the story in the 14th chapter is when they're in this promised land, and there were strongholds that had to be taken for their security and their difficulty. Now, I'd like to go into a long exposition about war, but you wouldn't stay with me. You guys would go out and start playing in the bounce house and everything, so I won't do that. We can have that in a personal conversation. No one wants a war, but sometimes you can't have peace unless you tackle the giants that are out to get your loved ones. And the strongholds were in the land, and they represented evil, because in those days, I know archaeologically, a very popular trend was for people to sacrifice their children to Baal. And those strongholds had to be taken. That culture could not be adapted. It couldn't be synchronized into our culture, or into their culture. And so Joshua got up and said, which one of the tribes will take Hebron, the high country, the difficult country? And all the young men and all the young women did one of these volunteers, like, take one step forward, and they all took one step back. Not us. We're not going to do it. Can't someone else do it? When we started this church 34 years ago, We started in Lake Washington High School, and we had to set up every week. It was so laborious. We'd get up at 5 in the morning. We had to carry in the altar. I had to find some volunteer in the church that would get up to help me carry the altar, because we had a very heavy altar that was made for me as a gift by my youth pastor, Dick Sanders. And Jackie is very strong, but she needs to work on her upper body strength, and she couldn't carry the other end. So I'd have to work on someone, because we had to lift it up into a pickup and push it in. And one time, Linda's mom, who was in her 70s in those days, observed, she said, all the people that help you, Pastor Tim, are the old people. The young people come late and leave early. What is it with those old people, those young people? And I said, the old people are courageous. They're Caleb's. Well, that was the situation here, because Caleb made a speech, and it's gone down in history. And this is what he said. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive. Do you know that you are alive for a reason? It's not an accident. There's a purpose behind your life. At any age, no matter how much brokenness is in your life, no matter how much displacement is taking place in your life is a gift, not only to you, but to the whole world. And it's a gift from God. Caleb says, he's kept me alive for 45 years, since the time he said to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. 85 years, and he's going to take the high ground. I'm still as strong today. This guy's a braggart too, isn't he? I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go into battle now as I was then. Now, how many people think he was using hyperbole when he said that? That he think he was strong in his hyperbole, or as vigorous as he was? You think an 85-year-old could be that strong? I do. I've seen some tough old 85-year-olds you won't want to mess with. I just turned 63. I can still bench press as much as I ever could, which is a good amount. I just couldn't chase a bad guy. I'd have someone else catch him and bring him to me if I had to beat up a bad guy. But he says, I'm just as tough as I always was. Give me the high ground. He was more young-minded than the young people. He believed, why? Because he believed life was a gift, not an accident. Say it to yourself. Life, not out loud, but just say it in your mind. Life is a gift, not an accident. Your life is a gift to you, to your family, to your loved ones, your friends, your enemies, to the whole world. It's a gift from God. It's how he's going to make a difference in the problems in our nation and the problems in this world. It's through people. It's not through flying saucers. It's not through laser beams. It's through people that he's going to make a difference. So Caleb was young. He's vigorous. He's young-minded. He said, I'll take the high ground. The word Caleb means dog. And I don't know if that's good or bad, if he just loved dogs, like Pastor Linda loves dogs. Have you noticed that she's crazy about dogs and Rich has to put up with it? I don't know if he loved dogs and had a dog along with him. Most of the biblical scholars think it's maybe he was tenacious as a dog. You didn't want to mess with him because you might win the battle, but you'd be very sore afterwards. But his name meant dog, and he had been blessed by God to be 85 and to take the high ground. Now we're to the book of 1 Samuel. Because when they had to set up a government, they believed that the least government was the best, actually. They chose a theocratic anarchy. In other words, God would rule, and they'd have someone that would just ask for everyone to look for God's will. And they called him a judge. And you know who the first judge was of Israel? Caleb's son. That had this idea that God wasn't through him, that he had given the gift of life. God's given you the gift of life. It's given me the gift of life. And Caleb was going to live on the promises of God. Now we have a choice there. There's these strongholds in the land. They didn't take all the strongholds. They began to influence Israel. You have strongholds in your life that you can let stay there. Every one of us do. My health is a stronghold. I'm going to take that stronghold until I can hike from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail. That's a lot of work I have ahead of me. But I'm going to take down that stronghold so I can be the person that God has meant for me. And others of you have strongholds. Maybe problems that you nurse, self-pity, anger, pride. And God wants to take down those strongholds. And he does it by faith for us to believe that he is stronger than those strongholds built in our life. He was going to take down the strongholds. You know, when it comes to the United States of America, none of us think it's perfect. There's not one person here that thinks it's perfect. There's not one founding father that thought it was perfect. No, we had the chance to try to do something right. And we still have the chance, and we still need to keep working on it. There are many issues that need to be addressed. We could give up, we could be frustrated, we could have another civil war, which would be a horrible thing. Or it's the Christians that are going to hold people together. Christians have had this tradition throughout history of honoring whatever nation they're in and being the best citizens they could possibly have. It started in the first century. Jesus started it himself whenever they said, do we pay our taxes to this corrupt tax system? And Jesus said, give me a coin. Whose face is on the coin? Caesar. Give unto Caesar all the things that belong to Caesar. Give unto God all the things that belong to God. That's a pretty good split for God, isn't it? Caesar got the coins, God gets everything else. All of our commitment. Since that time, Christians, even in the first generation when most of the Christians were slaves, do you understand how horrible that was in the Roman Empire? They had no control of their family. You might fall in love with someone and have a marriage performed, and then they're sold to someone else. Or your kids are sold to someone to be a slave and to be abused. And yet they were the most loyal citizens. People say that's the lack of courage of Christianity to stand against slavery, but it wasn't. They were going to change the system from within by the power of love, and they did. They refused to do the things that were against their conscience, and so they died in mass. They were martyred in mass. So that when they were called to worship Caesar, that's where they crossed the line. They'd be good citizens, but they weren't going to worship Caesar. And when the soldiers got tired of killing these courageous Christians, the number one employer of Christians stopped being slavery, started being soldiers. And these soldiers started to refuse to have the My Lai massacre or anything else like that. They had ethics that stood above that until the emperor, it was plain to see the most logical political decision was to become a Christian because they were the best citizens there. That happened in every country and continues to happen today. It's going on in Egypt today. There are 12 million Christians that live in Egypt, and they will be the best citizens. They'll serve nonviolently as pacifists, as doctors. That's why so many Coptics are doctors and nurses. But they won't go against their conscience. They're the best citizens. China at one time, the Cultural Revolution, were exterminating Christians. They took all the pastors and they threw them in jail, something I hope that you don't decide to do. But the church grew 10 times as fast when all the pastors were in jail. I shouldn't tell you that, but it did. Until they learned that, man, our most loyal citizens, they won't take their children, they won't kill their children, they won't do this, they won't do that. Our most loyal citizens that we can depend on for honesty and everything else are Christians. And so now you have some of the highest officials in the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government, that are becoming Christians. And they're becoming more, moving away from the totalitarian viewpoint. That's happened in nation after nation for 2,000 years because Christians celebrate not only our independence, they celebrate Canada Day in Canada, which is July 1st, right? And Canada is a pretty good ally. Last night in the service, we have this family that's from Holland, and they had just great stories. I wish you could hear all the stories from the different services. And this new family that's joined and they're getting involved in the church, he grew up in World War II Holland. And he was telling stories about what it was like, how poor they were during World War II. that his parents had to make their shoes, and they had to make their clothes, and they were freezing, and how his sister had her bike stolen and had to travel, and so her dad made her a new bike because they wanted the wheels, and so he made wooden wheels for the bicycle. And he said, I can't tell you how great it was until the day that the Canadian Army came in to liberate our city. He said, we actually, as kids, climbed up on the tank. They let us get in the tanks. We didn't care where we were going. We were being liberated. You see that every country, Dietrich Bonhoeffer did the same thing in Germany, trying to lead a revolution there. Every country, it's these Christians that are brave that say, yes, I'm going to be a good citizen. I'm not going to go against my conscience and what God says, but I'm going to do the right thing. And that's what Caleb did. He went with the 12. There could have been a civil war there. He voted against them. They lost in a landslide, 10-2. But he outlived them, and he was back there. And now he said, give me the high ground. Now I just have to get them. Here's the part where you play the game, okay? Let's play it. You guys come charging up here with your swords, and we'll have a sword fight. Can you imagine this 85-year-old charging up the mountain? And first he just charges the mountain, and then maybe his grandson or granddaughter's like, well, I guess I got to go too. And his cousin, because the whole tribe, and they all came together. That's what our church is all about. We hopefully have people from all different political backgrounds that come together to honor Jesus Christ, to treat other people with respect, and actually be able to talk politics. A lot of people say, never talk politics. At our dinner table, our rule is we always talk politics. We have very intense discussions. I can't tell you how many times that both my daughters have told me at dinner they're never going to speak to me again. I kind of know that that's not going to happen. But we have very intense discussions, and it's fun. One election, we voted for 5 different parties in our family. That's all the people we had. I think our dog might have voted for someone else, too. But we can do that because of Jesus Christ, because he gives us the capacity to treat every human being with respect and dignity. That's changing the world. And we believe that God is bigger than any of the problems. America needs a big dose of that, to believe that we have more in common. We need to do this together. They're tough issues. They're always oversimplified. All the time I hear them talked about. They're always oversimplified, maybe because people just don't want to use their brains anymore. They're oversimplified. I happen to be on the front lines of many of those issues and know people by name and know the complexities of them. And it's because the conversation never gets deep enough, it never gets honest enough, it never gets profound enough that we can actually get to a point where we're working on the solutions. What the churches do and have done since the beginning of our nation is we just get to work on the solutions, regardless of the politics. It doesn't even cost any tax money. It's people that give generously from their tithes and offerings that we can challenge these problems, just like Caleb. Give me the high ground. I'm the youngest minded thinking person here, 85 years old. My dad preached on this when he was 65 years old. I remember it to this day because my dad's name is Dale Vernon White. And he told the church at that time, I'd never heard this before, that he always hated the name Dale and hated the name Vernon. And so he had a judge in the congregation come up at that point and legally changed his name to Caleb. And I called my dad that afternoon after I heard about this, and I said, Dad, you said you hated the name Dale? He said, yeah, Dale Evans and Roy Rogers. You know, I never liked the name Dale. I'm like, well, why did you name me Dale then? Because that's my middle name, Dale. So maybe when I'm 65, I'll change my middle name Dale to Vernon or something different. But it's a new resolution to stay forever young. We should have had Elliot sing Forever Young up here. Young of mind, young of heart. Our nation needs to be young, ready to tackle the problems, not complain about the problems or attack the people. Ready to enter into discussions because we have that ability as followers of Jesus Christ to respect one another. So it's at this moment that we pledge our allegiance to this nation as followers of Jesus Christ. You know, on July 4th, 1826, 2 opponents passed away on the same 4th of July. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They had been friends during the Revolution, the whole Adams family, not the Adams family from the TV show. Samuel Adams, John Adams. We're all revolutionaries together. Then when it got to politics, Adams and Jefferson were on the opposite sides of almost every issue. On states' rights versus the unity, on every issue that you could think of. And the blend of their ideas is what we were left with in our Constitution. They were friends, opponents, and when John Adams died on July 4th, he said, I guess Thomas Jefferson, my rival, outlived me. And little did he know that 400 miles away, Thomas Jefferson was passing on to heaven at the same time. Our nation exists because of that common dignity and respect and love that we need in our families, we need in our church, we need in our communities, we need in this nation, and we need in this world. So even though the choir's there, here's an application for you. If you don't have any friends that disagree with you, then you've got work to do. How can you influence anyone? How can you be influenced? Unless you reach out to have non-Christian friends. If you're Republican, I challenge you to get some Democrat friends. If you're a Democrat, I challenge you to get some Republican friends. You even get some friends from the Green Party or whatever else. Because we're meant to be salt and light in this world and to make a difference and have such a commitment, the commitment of Caleb, that we'll take the high ground. We're sticking with this team. We've got a job to do. And it's glorious to be given the gift of life to make that difference, to dream of taking peace to this world. And peace doesn't come cheaply. You have to pay a price for peace.